This is a live shot of Ukraine right now, Kiev, the capital, and you can see it looks quiet there. But the protests against the government from those protesters has raged on. These are different shots now that you're going to see. The smoke, the fires. Today has been called the deadliest day since the conflict began. Let me just give you some of the numbers. 70 people are believed to have been killed. Overall, the total is now close to 100. Again, these are all reports. 67 police officers have reportedly been captured by protesters. Today, Canada and the European Union announced new sanctions on senior Ukrainian government officials. The U.S. has imposed a travel ban, as has Canada. The German and French and Polish ministers continue to meet with both sides in Kiev. Just where that leads, we don't know. So, more violence, more pressure from the international community. But do these measures have any effect? This has been going on for a long time. What will it take to end the ongoing bloodshed? Joining me via Skype from Winnipeg, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence, James Bezan, is here. From Toronto, NDP finance critic Peggy Nash is here. And at the convention in Montreal, the Liberal Foreign Affairs critic Marc Garneau is there. You can see it's quiet in the convention centre where he is. It will get a little noisier there. Justin Trudeau will be speaking later. Mr. Bezan, let me start with you. First of all, tell us a bit about the sanctions now imposed by the Canadian government.
Also, Prime Minister Harper has announced that we are expanding our sanctions and targeting the Yanukovych regime, all the authorities who are responsible for the bloodshed and the violence on the streets. So there is an expanded list of people that now cannot enter Canada. And more importantly, that we are going after the Yanukovych regime and all the authorities and their supporters. This includes the oligarchs who are supporting Yanukovych in these actions, so that they can't have any access to financial instruments, to any deposits or properties that they have stationed here in Canada. Of course, Prime Minister Harper has been reaching out, along with Minister John Baird, to our European allies and the United States to join us in expanding this role of sanctions.
All right. The travel ban would prevent individuals from entering Canada. The aim of the economic sanctions, as I read, would be to freeze assets in Canada belonging to senior Ukrainian officials, prohibit any person in Canada and any Canadian outside of Canada from dealing with property wherever it's situated on behalf of the designated person. But the Russian Foreign Affairs Minister Lavrov has called not only the Canadian sanctions but all Western sanctions on Ukraine, and I'm going to get the words right here. He said these are government blackmail. Okay, what do you make of that, Mr. Bezan?
Well, I find it laughable because from the Russian standpoint, they've already been bribing the Ukrainian government by sending them $2 billion earlier this week, $3 billion a few weeks ago, to continue to not only support the government of Ukraine in their military and police actions against their own people, but they're using it to buy favoritism and increase their own, I guess, sphere of influence within Ukraine. So, what we're doing is being on the side of democracy, on the side of the peaceful protesters, or was peaceful protesters, and supporting them in their aspirations for a free and independent Ukraine.
Let me bring in the opposition parties. Peggy Nash, what's your sense of the Canadian sanctions? Are they enough?
Well, certainly we have been calling for stronger sanctions for some time, so we welcome the government's latest move. I can tell you that, the horrific violence that's taking place in Ukraine right now is certainly gripped so many in the Ukrainian diaspora here in Canada, and like many of those who have been election observers in Ukraine, I've been 3 times an election observer there, to see that Maidan Square, the scene of such horrific violence and bloodshed, it really is unbelievable. But I can tell you, I was just out at a rally again this week, and people are concerned that this will get even worse. Yeah. So sanctions are welcome. We'd like to see more. We'd like to see the Prime Minister of Canada maybe pick up the phone, call Mr. Yanukovych, use whatever pressure he can. Canada has a special relationship with Ukraine. We were the first country to recognize Ukraine after it became once again a free independent nation. We'd like to see independent Canadian observers on the ground perhaps doing whatever is possible to turn down the temperature there. And if there is any way to offer some kind of mediated solution to this, so that the risk of greater violence is toned down, and we can perhaps find a political solution. We'd like to see Canada play a role in that as well. We have a very special relationship with Ukraine, more than a million members of the diaspora here, and they're all just heartsick about what's happening.
Right, and by the way, this is it's just starting to escalate with the number of deaths today, Mr. Garneau. Okay, so you got Canada, got new sanctions, a travel ban. The U.S. has a travel ban. I don't think they've actually imposed formal sanctions yet. What's your view of what needs to be done? Are the sanctions enough to stop the violence there?
No, they're not enough, but we certainly support the sanctions. In fact, we led the charge on that in December, asking the government to put on personal sanctions. There are other things like having official observers there, providing rapid, no-cost visas to people who are at the heart of this and who feel threatened and they need to leave the country. But I brought up something important yesterday on your show, Evan, and that is the fact that at this point, we feel that the Yanukovych government has lost complete credibility in the country. This is a chaotic situation. Potentially 100 people have been killed in the last 3 days. Mr. Yanukovych is incapable of sitting down and working out a solution that will satisfy the current situation, the current protests. He has lost all credibility, and we are calling for international pressure that new elections be called as soon as possible, internationally supervised, because this is a regime that has totally lost its credibility. We need to take that next step if we're going to have any hope of reestablishing peace and stability.
Mr. Bezan, let me just try to get some details about this. How did Canadian Border Services know who to stop from coming into Canada if you won't release the list of officials to whom the travel ban applies?
Well, and that speaks to the larger issue of timeline. So, we did pass a unanimous motion in the House of Commons that called for sanctions. That was brought forward by the Conservative government. We had take no debate and emergency debate that was brought forward by Ted Opitz, member of Parliament. So we've had the discussions. There was direction given by Parliament to the government, and Minister Baird and Prime Minister Harper, along with Chris Alexander, Minister of Immigration, have been working on how we move forward in targeting these sanctions. So first, it's identifying the people that have ties here to Canada.
Do you have a list of those people?
Well, they're working with Canada Border Services, the Ukrainian community itself, and trying to make sure that we compile a complete list. The more important thing here is looking at who the actors and players are within Ukraine right now that have orchestrated all the problems that we're seeing on the streets. This bloodshed, this needless bloodshed, and brutality being expressed by the Yanukovych government is completely unacceptable. And so Prime Minister Harper and our government has been saying, on behalf of all Canadians, and Ukrainian Canadians in particular, that this is not at all a way to treat your own society.
And I get that, and we're watching the violence. It's shocking to see. But we've gone, I think, if I'm correct here, tell me if I'm wrong, we've got about $300 million in bilateral trade with Ukraine. In other words, it's not a significant amount. Outside of the sanctions today, the economic sanctions and the travel ban, which are clearly still working on the list, is there any other kind of moral suasion, or that Peggy Nash says pick up the phone and try to call the president there? What else can Canada do, if anything?
Well, we're actively engaged.
One thing that I thought we should do, if we can get observers on the ground there, is gather evidence for potential criminal sanctions. When you have a government that attacks its own people, there needs to be consequences for that. And again, when you have observers on the ground gathering evidence there as eyewitnesses, you have the potential for maybe bringing future criminal sanctions against those responsible. We also think that the EU should play a strong role. Our foreign affairs critic Paul Dewar has been in Brussels this week meeting with the EU trying to push them to become more engaged. And certainly we're also pushing for another emergency debate in the House of Commons next week. Now that doesn't solve the problems, but it does focus the attention of parliamentarians on this urgent situation. But we need to bring whatever pressure we can bring to this situation. People are just heartsick about what's happening.
I got 30 seconds. Mr. Garneau, yeah, go ahead.
And I've asked the Foreign Affairs Committee to have hearings with witnesses on the Ukrainian situation. They've agreed to do that, and it starts on the 26th. But let me say it one more time. This is important, Evan. We don't believe at this point, after 3.5 months of escalating bloodshed, that the Yanukovych regime is salvageable. It has been very, very clear that he is not prepared to sit down and work out a solution that will accommodate a vast number of Ukrainians, and that at this point the only solution really is for new elections to be held, and that at least offers the hope of finding a government that will provide the stability that is required there.
You know, I just want to say this one. You know, the word we haven't used in this entire discussion is Putin. Here we are, we're focused on the Olympics. I recognize it was a golden day for Canadian athletes. We don't want to take away that. And there's always been this notion, I don't know why, to separate politics from the Olympic Games. But here's Putin parading around on the world stage at the Olympics, but he's got a profound relationship with the Yanukovych government in Ukraine. Is this an issue that has to be raised not necessarily with the Yanukovych government, Mr. Bezan, but with Mr. Putin himself?
Yeah, and I did say that earlier, that the Russian sphere of influence within Ukraine is troubling, and it is one of the problems that we're dealing with. But, you know, as Peggy mentioned, observers, we have people on the ground. Our diplomats are there, they're safe, but they are keeping note and working with other like-minded nations in their foreign services to take note of who is in charge and who is making these decisions to do so much brutality and harm to the Ukrainian people. And so we are taking note of all those individuals, and we are going to use that in applying sanctions and economic sanctions, and ultimately down the road for criminal actions against these individuals. So it is important that we have these debates and we have these discussions, but I'm just very proud of our government and Prime Minister Harper for taking the lead and the charge on the expanded sanctions we had, providing medical supplies on the ground to help those that have been injured because of this brutality, and making sure that we get the aid where it's needed right now. But as Mark said, the Yanukovych regime has no credibility. Politicians over there are not at all trusted, and we have to find a new way working with the leaders of the Maidan as the way forward, and that's probably going to be early elections and negotiation with the Yanukovych system.
Well, that certainly would be a best-case scenario. I got 10 seconds, Ms. Nash.
Evan, I was just going to say that one thing I've heard loud and clear from the many people who have contacted my office here in Toronto is people are very, very worried what happens after the Olympics. That there's been this horrible bloodshed this week, but that things will really escalate after the world stops watching in Sochi. So I've heard that concern expressed, and I think that the time is now for us to do absolutely everything possible to prevent any further escalation.
All right. Well, there's a lot of agreement, I know, between all three parties. You're all watching this very closely, and of course, what to do in a very complex developing situation is something we're watching carefully. Mr. Bezan, Ms. Nash, Mr. Garneau, always good to have the three of you on the program.
Thanks, Evan.